Well, tonight is one of those everything technically that could go wrong will go wrong. So if audio goes wrong, let's just add that to the list. And I laugh because one of the things that we're talking highly about tonight is certainty. And I think to have certainty, oftentimes you have to have control. And when you don't have control, there's a certain level of, okay, you just go with it. And that is one of those nights. So if things don't go right, just will you laugh with me and not at me? Was that a laughing at me or with me? You're still not admitting it. Well, first, I want to dismiss the kiddos. So I saw some ferociously swirling about in the back like wild beasts. You are dismissed. Go back there, find Miss Erin, and she'll walk you to kids ministry. I did tell them to be quiet, but in a really gentle way, because the whole kids should be seen and not heard just isn't reality. And actually it was quite fun and beautiful, although probably distracting for this whole half of the room. But it was quite fun and beautiful because they were swirling around and dancing and just like pure bliss and joy in the whole song service. And next week we're going to be diving into this childlike faith. And I thought, yeah, that's it, right there. They've got it. So I'm sorry if you were distracted over here, but it was cute. It was beautiful. Hi, One Church. Hi. How are you all? It's very bright in here, right? I told you, all sorts of technical difficulties. If you're a first-time guest, I want to welcome you. My name is Angie Von Slaughter, and I hope that from the second you walked in those doors, you felt welcome. That's one of the things that we want to express more than anything, is that you would feel safe, you would feel welcome, you'd feel loved. On behalf of our community, I want to extend that welcome, not just from myself, but from this community. Because I know from so many people here and the hearts here, they're happy that you're here and that you belong with us. One Church is a progressive and non-denominational church, and we really seek to reflect the inclusive love of God. And I say seek because it's nothing that I think we can quite perfect, but we sure try. And so I hope that you feel that. If you're new to One Church, and I've been meeting tonight's a little bit light this evening, but over the last few weeks, months, we've been meeting a lot of new people. So if you are new and you'd love to get connected, build community, I'd invite you to fill out a blue Connect card. You'll find them in the info table out front. And you can go ahead and fill out your name, your info. And if you have any questions, it's really just a simple way to stay in touch. If you have questions about who we are, what we do here at One Church, if you just want to connect and have coffee, sometimes I know we attract a certain type of person that is seeking more than probably just an everyday church. I think a lot of people come here with certain needs. And so sometimes a simple cup of coffee and that solitude with someone can be the best thing ever. So if you're looking for that, that's great too. So fill that out at the info table. Tonight, we're starting a new series titled Unearthing Questions. And one of the things that One Church has been founded on, and it's in our values and has been rooted in who we are, is this idea of questions and doubts welcome. We've been saying that since, the beginning of this entire thing. We've been saying this for a very long time, since One Church was actually meeting at homes and people were sitting around couches. People have been saying this for a long time, that it's questioning that has brought this community together. And it's this openness paired with questioning that really creates the essence of who One Church is. So we don't talk about it so obviously all the time, because I think most people get what we're after here, but I thought this might be something good to revisit, this idea of questioning. And unearthing, in the title, the word unearth means to uncover, to excavate, dig up, or discover something hidden. So when I'm talking about unearthing questions, I'm really talking about discovering hidden questions, or discovering something that was hidden and you didn't see prior, but now you do. And there's this old adage that once you see, you can't unsee. And questions, well, they can be used to seek out information, just to simply know something, to inquire gently or rudely interrogate. I'm sure some of you have been there. Someone's berating you, asking you ferociously a question. They can be open-ended questions to encourage dialogue. They can be closed, just a simple yes or no. They can be laced with doubt, disbelief, debate, or they can be shrouded in wonder and mystery and awe. A question is a really diverse thing. Astronomer and cosmologist Carl Sagan once said, "There are naive questions, tedious questions, ill-phrased questions, questions put after inadequate self-criticism. But every question is a cry to understand the world. There is no such thing as a dumb question." And I know some of you would argue. They'd say, "I've heard some pretty dumb questions." But if we get the root of what that's after, it's really after knowing. It's a cry to understand. And as we explore over the next few weeks, questions filled with doubt, wonder, and God's divinity, it's my hopes that we'll embrace this spiritual practice of questioning, that we'll seek a deeper understanding. And I know many of you already do this, and I want to prompt some of you, if you haven't, to maybe incorporate it a little bit more. So tonight's message we'll start with is titled Uprooted, and it's facing uncertainty. I was instantly inspired by this concept a few weeks ago. We've had monsoon season like crazy around here. And I was driving from downtown Phoenix all the way to Chandler. And I say that all the way because if you've ever driven it, sometimes during traffic it seems like forever. And I'm driving, and I see, once I get into this more rural area off the highway in Chandler, I'm starting to see tree by tree just literally plucked up off on the side of the road. And at first I saw it, and I just saw one, and I thought it was a tree being planted. And then I looked again, I took a double take, and I thought, oh my gosh, these are all the trees being uprooted from the monsoon season. And it was shocking to me, not only to see all these trees just kind of haphazardly laying around, but what was actually really surprising to me was to see that these trees just looked plucked up like weeds, and they were massive trees with tiny, tiny roots. And I don't know if you've ever seen that. We have trees in our backyard. We have one that is so sprawlingly long, I'm waiting for it to bust up the concrete on our back porch. It just is stretching far and deep and wide. These trees were nothing like that. It literally looked like if you just plucked some weeds in your backyard, you have this tall shrub and this little tiny ball of roots. And I saw that and I thought, no wonder the tree fell over. Like, no wonder. It's obvious. This tree did not have any roots to sustain it, to hold it, to keep it grounded. And so the night before this monsoon comes through and you have this terrible storm. And what happens to the tree? It falls over. And to me, I couldn't help, because this is where my brain goes, is I'm not only thinking about the tree and I'm wondering, like, okay, so are they baby trees? Is that why their roots aren't that big? And I'm analyzing what's going on. And then I'm also wondering, how are they going to replant it, and can they be taken care of? But I'm also thinking, isn't that like so many of us? That, like many of us, we were rooted, and I know many of us, because I've talked to a lot of you, we were rooted in this certainty-based faith. And life brought this perfect storm, just so, along the road of your spiritual journey. And this caused us to doubt, this caused us to question, and our questions birthed questions, which birthed questions, which birthed more questions. And it was like pulling a thread on a sweater, and it just didn't end. And all it takes is one question to uproot the whole thing. And suddenly you find yourself feeling like that withered tree just on the side of the road, uprooted, unearthed, and nowhere to plant yourself and grow. And when I think of those trees, and ultimately humanity, because that was the deeper thing here, I'm reminded of Psalms 1:3. So they grow strong like a tree planted by a stream, a tree that produces fruit when it should and has leaves that never fail. Now, when I was younger, we sang a hymn called I Shall Not Be Moved. Does anyone? I got a couple of heads nodding. Yes. And it was taken from this scripture and also a similar scripture in Jeremiah. And the song went something like this, and I'm tempted to sing it for you all just so you can join in. Does anyone know it? You can sing it with me? Yep. Okay, ready? If I trust him ever, I shall not be moved. He will fail me never, I shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the water, I shall not be moved. Yeehaw! Right? And it goes on, and it says, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's planted by the water, I shall not be moved. And I remember as a kid, first of all, loving it just because I loved music, and I didn't really know what we were singing other than, I think this means God has my back always. I think that's what this song is about. And I liked it. Corny as it was, I liked it. And I remember thinking there was such confidence and trust in those words. Such unabashed trust that no matter what, I won't be moved. I'm planted, I'm firm. And it seems so simple to me, especially as a kid. So simple, this I'm tethered to God and that I can't be moved or shaken by the things of life. And that is until life shook me upside down. And then those words became confusing to me. They became very confusing to me because I thought, what do you mean I can't be moved? Clearly I'm very moved. Clearly I'm confused. And I don't share my story often, or as often as I used to, should I say. One, because I think that we all have we have multifaceted stories. If you sit down with us, we have so many movable parts. Our spiritual stories, our relational stories. But I don't share it often, one, because I have so many other things to say. But two, sometimes I forget how painful it was. And some of you know what I'm talking about. The time really does heal. And you forget what it's like until you remember and you sit with it and you go, yeah, that wasn't fun. So most people assume that my point of deconstruction, if you will, or questions and doubts came about because of my sexuality and faith. I think almost everyone just has that assumption. Well, of course, that would catapult you into questioning the Bible, into questioning your spirituality. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I genuinely really did struggle with that immensely my whole life. But the point of really questioning, I'm talking about deep questioning, really began for me in my late teens. And at 19, I was this really fun, I thought, vibrant teenager who was just curious, really artistic, just insatiably curious about life. And I started to question the church authority. I've always been a good kid, and for the most part, I tend to just say, yes, sir, no, ma'am. But I started to question church authority. Not outright, just in my mind, because there was always this way of our leadership that would profess this love, this incredible love of God. And yet these people that were behind the pulpits were some of the most unkind people I know. And so I started to see some things that didn't match up. And there was this like militant certitude, some of you might know what I'm talking about, that was preached from that pulpit. I told you we're having technical difficulties. Don't mind me. Just squishing the ear. So there was always this militant certitude that was preached. It was like fall in line, my way or the highway, or you could say my way or hell, because that's really how it was. These are the beliefs or else. And I just remember thinking, like, this can't be right. This doesn't sit well with me. This doesn't sit well with me that you're teaching this saving and healing love of Jesus, and then you're kicking people out of your churches because they don't adhere to your theology. And I thought, you're saying one thing, but I'm feeling another. And you might know what I'm talking about. There's this underlying tone that's like something dark is going on. You're saying this, but I feel this energy that's not good. And it felt heavy. So because I'm an external processor, talked it out with some friends. And I was just sharing my ideas. And I'm such a what-if person, always have been. And now I know it's curiosity. But then it was very much like doubt. And I was like, but what if? What if this? And I made the mistake of sharing these questions with some friends. And like a game of telephone, this message was spread from person to person, eventually making its way to our senior pastor, who was a really rigid man. I'll tell you, he was very intense. If you talked to pastor, it was like you're in trouble or you're his favorite person. There was no gray. And so I remember thinking, oh no, this is not good. So one time after a service, he pulled me aside and he leans in close and he says, Angie, there's fire wherever you go. And I'll never forget, just looking me in the eye, there's fire wherever you go. And I keep hearing rumors about you. And if I hear one more thing, you're out. I'm 19. Imagine how you were at 19, right? I'm 19, I'm a kid. I'm full of curiosity, doubts, teenage rebellion. I mean, come on, cut me some slack, right? Have a little patience. And up until this point, if I'm honest, I had never smoked. I had never drank. I barely cursed. I was a good kid. And I say was because there was then life, and you grow up and you learn some things and experience some things. But that's who I was. And so to be faced with this, Angie, you're this, and I thought, gosh, you don't know me. I actually am trying to do what's right. And yet there was this simple seed of a question, and for me, it unearthed the whole thing. And so I burst out into tears, and I just remember being hurt, overwhelmed, and I didn't know what to say other than I just cried and I blurted out, save yourself the trouble, I'm gone. Because I thought, I don't want to stay in a place that would treat me this way. And so I left. I left the church that I was born and raised in and that my dad was a pastor in, never to come back again. So, yeah, my sexuality was a huge part of my questioning, but this was really the beginning. Because this made me go, what are we doing? This thing we call God and church and spirituality and Christianity, it's not that. At least I don't think it should be that. And so I remember leaving and I told my mom these words. I said, if that is Christianity and that is God, I want nothing to do with it. And I meant it, which was shocking for me, the good kid that loved God. But because I was hurt and I was angry and I felt abandoned, and I know some of you know what that feels like. And even though I didn't realize it at the time, I now know I'm not the only human that's ever felt that way. And interesting, as I talked about earlier, right here in the Psalms 1:3, how we have David that talks about this tree being planted by the water. And King David talks with such beautiful words and confidence and certainty in this psalm. And the reason why I love Psalms is it's very much a depiction of probably how most of us have felt, the good and the bad. And so then we fast forward to Psalm 88, and we find his words that are less like a tree planted firmly, but one that's uprooted and laying on the side of the road. So bear with me if you want to join along. We're going to read Psalm 88 because I think this can depict a lot of what most of us have felt at that time. This is the Message translation. It says, God, you're my last chance of the day. I spend the night on my knees before you. Put me on your salvation agenda. Take notes on the trouble I'm in. I've had my fill of trouble. I've camped on the edge of hell. I'm written off as a lost cause, one more statistic, a hopeless case, abandoned as already dead. One more body and a stack of corpses. And not so much as a gravestone, I'm a black hole in oblivion. You've dropped me into a bottomless pit, sunk me in a pitch-black abyss. I'm battered senseless by your rage, relentlessly pounded by your waves of anger. You turned my friends against me. You made me horrible to them. I'm caught in a maze and I can't find my way out. I'm blinded by tears of pain and frustration. I call to you, God, all day I call. I wring my hands, I plea for help. Are the dead a live audience for your miracles? Do ghosts ever join the choirs that praise you? Does your love make any difference in a graveyard? Is your faithful presence noticed in the corridors of hell? Are your marvelous wonders ever seen in the dark? Your righteous ways noticed in the land of no memory? I'm standing my ground, God, shouting for help. At my prayers every morning, on my knees each daybreak, why, God, do you turn a deaf ear? Why do you make yourself scarce? For as long as I can remember, I've been hurting. I've taken the worst you can hand out, and I've had it. Your wildfire anger has blazed through my life. I'm bleeding black and blue. You've attacked me fiercely from every side, raining down blows till I'm nearly dead. You made lover and neighbor alike dump me. The only friend I have left is darkness. You don't hear that read often in church, do you? You always hear the ones that David's like, oh, sing to the Lord, oh my soul. Sing a new song, yay. And then you hear this and you go, wow, that was some heaviness. David experienced this darkness. David experienced doubt. God, where are you? Where are you? And when you're in this season of questioning and doubting, this is what this feels like. Some of us become angry. Some of us become curious. Some of us become insatiably questioning and wondering and lost and frustrated. And if you've ever felt like King David, you're not alone. The common perspective of modern Christianity has been to overcome questions and doubts. And if you know what I mean, it's to overcome them, quickly move along. Don't stay there. God forbid, don't stay there. Some of you were taught doubting was a sign of weak faith. Most of us have probably been taught doubting is a sin. And others still were in a culture that tried to provide very clear answers to your doubting. So if you were faced with doubt, okay, great, well, here, let me answer your questions for you. And that actually doesn't do us any good, because when we're questioning, we're seeking more than answers. Father Richard Rohr talks about this. We're not actually seeking the answer. We're seeking the journey. That's what we're seeking. And yet doubt and faith have been clear dance partners since the beginning of time. And it's been said that people of great faith often suffer great moments of doubt. After she passed away, it was reported that Mother Teresa had decades of doubt. Decades. We're not talking about a season. We're not talking about a couple months or a week. Mother Teresa, who's like a saint, doubted for decades about the ways of God and Spirit. In the Bible, we find Abraham, Sarah, Gideon, Job, Thomas, the author of Ecclesiastes, and yes, even Jesus himself, along with so many others that had a moment of questioning, where Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? So I want to give us a moment and say, what are your questions? What are the things that you are doubting, wondering, and asking? Now, I understand to just blurt them out, no one's going to feel safe. Because even though this place we call safe, it's still scary. It's still scary to say something that could potentially be the opposite of what the common narrative is. So, this was part of our technical difficulties, but we're going to roll with it. We're going to do a text polling. And I want to invite you at this time to take out your phones. Yes, you're allowed to. Don't get sidetracked checking Facebook notifications. Don't be texting your brother, sister, best friend. Go ahead and take a moment. Pull up your text messaging app. The results, unfortunately, won't show on the screen, but I'll try to show you on my tiny screen, and maybe we can make do. Go ahead and pull up your text messaging app, and go ahead and text to this number, 570-755-8373. And I'll repeat that again. 570-755-8373. 5, 8, 3, 7, 3. Good. Does anyone need another minute? Okay. So when you're ready, you can text your answer to this. The first question is in 1 or 2 words. So I want you to keep it concise. It'll make it easier for you with your texting fingers. In 1 or 2 words, describe the belief that first started your faith deconstruction. Now, if you've never been on a giant road of deconstruction, but you've had a moment of maybe we could call it a schism. You were no longer lining up with your previous faith community. What was that item, that belief, that theology, that moment that started that deconstruction? Okay. And I wish you all could see this, and I'll turn it around and I will try my best to read it. You won't be able to see it, it's very tiny. But you can, I bet from far back there, you can already see that hell is by far the biggest. So the most answers that come in, the word gets bigger. And like I said, we were hoping to have this on the screen. This is what happens when you try different technology. Okay, so you can see them coming in real time. So these are still coming in. But this is what some of the things that we have that are coming in. We see up here at the top, in giant letters, homosexuality, racism, suffering, the Bible, feeling alone, the existence of hell. And I actually see a lot of different verbiage and ways of saying that, and I also see hell right here in giant letters. Betrayal of church, didn't belong. Bible, Genesis, the Bible. Heaven and hell, are they real? God-ordained sin. Being gay is a sin. Fear, feeling pressure, not going to church was a sin. So I'm assuming for that person they mean that if you didn't go to church, it was a sin, and that caused that schism for them. Judgment. So we're getting a lot of things, afterlife. We're getting a lot of things about afterlife, judgment, hell, LGBT issues, and Bible. We're getting a lot of those things. And a lot of things will pop up, and what I'll do is I will, for you guys that are interested, I'll go ahead and take a screenshot and add it to our newsletter and to our Facebook group. But this could give you an idea of just what everybody in this room, it's one thing to just talk about it, but it's also a different thing to get a temperature of the room and go, what are some of the things that you questioned and wrestled with? And we're seeing a trend. Afterlife. The Bible, how do we read it? Is it real? Is it factual? Is it trustworthy? Being gay, is it a sin? And then you're having all sorts of other things about maybe end times or end of life. Big questions. For myself, if I'm honest, one of the first things I questioned was hell. And I had to question hell because I was told that's where I was going. I had to question it. And we laugh. It's true. I was told I was going there, and I thought, if that's the case, I need to figure this out real quick. Real quick. Whew, it's getting hot in here. So I picked up a copy, like some of you might have done, of Love Wins by Rob Bell, and it unearthed the whole thing for me. And I went, yes. These are questions I've been asking. And it talked about the age of accountability, which some of you that have been raised in church know about. So for instance, if you're raised in a church that says the sinner's prayer, and you say the sinner's prayer for salvation, at what point as a human adult do you have to say that in order to make it to heaven or hell? So a 12-year-old is probably conscious and aware of their mistakes. What about a 10-year-old? what about a 5-year-old? Does a 5-year-old know that they're a sinner and could potentially go to hell? What about a 3-year-old? You see these types of questions, and it just started to go, yeah, good point. Yep, good point. Yes, I've wondered this. And the whole thing just became sort of an unraveled mess. And I thought, well, and then I studied hell, and I studied what hell could mean, and studied how they described hell. And I went, okay, if that's how I've been reading it, and maybe I've been getting that not quite accurately, what does all of this mean? And so many of you understand it just became this thread. And he said, well, what about this then? What about Genesis? What about creation? Then what about Scripture? And you then become people that are labeled as heretics and doubters, but you become thinking people. And more often than not, we weren't allowed to become thinking people. And I think there's beauty in being thinking and feeling people. And I say this often, not relying heavily on one or the other, but being both. Using our brains, but using our hearts and our spirits. So now I want to ask another question. If you got your phones, I know most of you put it away, you thought you were done. That same text message that you had, that same number, and I'll repeat it again in case some of you have rotary phones and need to redial. You should be able to just keep responding to that same number. But in case you missed it the first time, 570-755-8373. The next question, it's why I'm glad this is anonymous, and I feel like you'll feel a sense of safety with this as well. The next question is a lot more vulnerable. It's not what was the thing that caused the questioning. This one is, what are you still questioning and doubting? Now, there's some options. So I'll repeat this a few times. There's a few options. So depending on your option, you text 1 through 7. Again, I'm sorry this didn't work out as seamlessly, but you can roll with me. You can text 1 to this number if you're still questioning the existence of God. You can text 2 if you're questioning and doubting Jesus. You can text 3 if you're questioning the Bible. You also can vote more than once. Text 4 if you're wrestling with or questioning with the theology of hell. The other one proved that. But if you are still, and there's a level of go ahead and be honest with that. Text 5 if you're wrestling with prayer. How does prayer work? Does prayer work? Does God hear me? This one's a big existential one. Text 6 if you're wrestling with just the meaning of life. What is all this about? Text 7 if it's something altogether not listed. Now from the back, and I'll go through those one more time quickly. So 1, the existence of God. 2, we could say Jesus, and that could mean multiple things. The divinity of Jesus or the human of Jesus, the triune God. 3, the Bible. 4, the theology of hell. 5, prayer. 6, the meaning of life. And 7, other. Now, I've been seeing votes pop in, and I'll relay them for you that can't see, because I know you can't. It's very tiny. But 23% of you are still, and I want to say this out loud. I wanted it to be anonymous, one, so you'd feel safe, because I don't know that some of you feel totally comfortable standing up and blurting what you're wrestling with. And we'll get there. I think we'll get there one day. But 24% of you in this room are still questioning and doubting the existence of God. A quarter. I'm not sure how many are here tonight. Last week, we've been averaging, let's say, around 150. Tonight looks less, like maybe 100. So let's say 25 of you. 7% are wrestling with who Jesus is. 23% are wrestling and questioning the Bible. 13% are wrestling and questioning and doubting the theology of hell. 15%, they're questioning and doubting prayer. How does prayer work? 2%, having the big existential question, which is a hard question. What's the meaning of life? And then you have 13% that are questioning something altogether different, which I would love to hear about that. So if you're in that 13% and you feel comfortable, I invite you to email me at angie@onechurch.com. I'd love to hear what else you might be questioning and wondering. Know that I am going to try to come from a place of non-judgment, because I too had my questions and still do. And I think that's a sign of spirituality, a sign of faith. So you get this sense now that this questioning and doubting, that's why we still have it in our values. It's one thing to talk about questioning and doubting back then, but you now see that a very large portion of this room is questioning something. Something. So over 65% of American adults question what they believe, and the number keeps going through the roof. So 65, almost 70% of American adults question what they believe. 44% of Americans, they'll go through a major faith transition at some point in their lifetime. If you're a millennial, which I barely made it into the millennial category. I'm what they call, I forget what it's called. I just say I'm an old millennial. A what? Edge? No, I'm not. It has a name. No, it has a different name, though, too. If somebody can come up with it, let me know. There is another one. I'm an old millennial. You can call me that. But if you're a millennial, you'll experience twice as many doubts as any other generational group. And I have my reasons and thoughts for that. I think it's because we were raised with that certainty, but at such a time in our formative years where we were able to kind of move away from that. And the younger generations, my goodness, you guys are just free thinking. And it's caused us to go, well, wait, certitude or what's this openness? Those of you who have been to college, so if any of you in here have any type of college education, you've been exposed to different ideas of any kind, philosophies, worldviews, different people. You are also twice as likely to experience doubt as those who have a high school education or less. So there's something like that old adage, the more you know, the less you know. I think that proves it. The more you learn. And I've sat down with pastor after pastor since I've stepped into this role, and we've talked about education and seminary. And I can't tell you how many would be vulnerable with me, but probably not so much with you. And they'll tell me, Angie, the more I know, the more I have no idea. And I don't think it's about the knowing. I think it's about the knowing. So we're faced with questions in our spirituality. There can often be this sense of fear. And this is sort of where I want to wrap things up with. There can honestly be this sense of fear that comes over, this panic and confusion at first. And some of you might know what I'm talking about. Some of you are currently there, and some of you were there. There can be a bit of this confusion, and it's what we call disorientation. It's where the ground is shaky, it doesn't make sense. What was no longer is. And questions can do this, but questions can honestly, and this is what I want to hinge on. I don't want to hinge on the negativity of questions. The rest of the series, I want to hinge on this, that questions can often be an indicator that the old things no longer work and that something new is trying to give way. We could call it a resurrection. But if we know anything about resurrection, something has to die. Something has to die in order for something new to be born. And death is painful, and it can be slow, but something new can be born in its place. And for me, the moment I realized that my questions and doubts weren't obstacles anymore, but if anything, an invitation into growth and exploration, for me, that was like a moment of freedom. That was a moment of liberation, of knowing I can actually sit in this and question and wonder and embrace them. And it's no longer a threat, but it's like, what if? Hey, God, I'm trying to understand you. And what if this? And I'm okay to ask and seek and explore. And I love this scripture found in Romans 4, verse 17. The God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that were not. So some of you, because I meet with you often, I feel, and we all are doing this in a sense, some of you might be in this place carrying around this dead thing that you're calling faith. And it's like dead weight. And it's hard to let some of that go. But maybe the divine is calling into being things that you've never had before. And I was shown this once, but if you want to receive, you can't receive with a closed fist. Sometimes you have to let it go and be open. But it's tiring to let that thing go. So maybe the divine is calling into something new. Things that didn't fit into your neat and tidy spiritual box. But instead making ways to see and experience this great mystery of God that goes beyond the walls of certitude. And so we talked about trees, and since we're on the trees and that metaphor, let's talk about plants for 1 second. So anybody have plants, house plants? Anybody good at taking care of plants? My wife is really great. I was just telling a story. I kill them all, but she's developed like this little green thumb and is like walking around the house and she's talking to them and touching them. I'm sorry if I'm making you sound weird, but she does. And they thrive. They thrive. If you want to know one of the common ways to kill a house plant, it's have Angie take care of it. But if you want to know one of the most common ways to kill a house plant, and I think all of us have done this, is while accidentally killing it by letting it stay in its container. One of the most common ways to kill a house plant is not repotting it. And you can see right here, this poor plant, it's choking itself out with its roots. And it won't get the proper nourishment or growth. And so, in fact, you can actually stunt its growth by keeping it this way and trimming it back. And it'll stay that way. But that's all it will ever be. But if that plant wants to grow, what will happen is it gets a mind of its own. And you can see on the bottom, the roots spring out the bottom. They come pouring out the plant. And they're literally just beckoning for growth. Get me out of here. And some plants will go so far as to even break open their pot or their container. Their roots will become so strong, they say, I can't be contained anymore. House plants can become bound by the containers that they're in. Let that sink in for a minute. Bound by the container. Those questions that are terrifying or that have left you uprooted may be paving the way for a spiritual replanting. They may be paving the way for a new container, a bigger container, one that's so big we probably can't even see the edges. Open and spacious to explore the wonder of God. Our questions, while they may be threatening at first, especially to our origins of faith if they're certitude, they may be paving the way for something bigger than we could ever imagine. But it's frightening to let that thing go, to let something new be resurrected. So at this time, I would like to invite the music team to come forward, and we'll take a moment of reflection and prayer. And first, I want to leave you with this African proverb that is wise. The one who asks questions doesn't lose his way. There's this idea with farming and ranching that when you have a small ranch, you naturally put up boundaries so that your cattle can stay in place and you can keep them contained. But what happens when you have acres beyond acres beyond acres beyond acres? You can't build a fence sometimes large enough to contain them. So farmers and ranchers have figured out a way to keep them contained, but in a way that helps them be free, and that's simply by planting a well, a water. They dig up a well and a hole and allow them to naturally come back. So if you get, there's this sense where they're free to explore. And it's not a terrifying thing, because why? They'll always come back. They come back because here's water, the living water. Here's the thing that gives them life. And when you have that mindset with your spirituality, you almost get this sense, and this sounds crazy, you almost get this sense that there is nothing too far. And when we get the scripture that nothing can separate us from the love of God, you get this thought that nothing is too far. Because we always come back to this well of life. We always come back to this well.